Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCG live codes, make sure you check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using that code OmniPoke. For today's video, we're going to be re-reviewing the Surging Sparks set review. We still have a number of tournaments in this format, but Prismatic Evolutions is right around the corner. Myself and Jack are going to be discussing that small set that only has a couple of impactful cards, but nonetheless, we're going to be talking about how those cards are going to be impacting the current decks and potentially future decks as well in tomorrow's video, so we have to talk about Surging Sparks. This is actually, I looked back at this earlier this morning, and we got this one really wrong in a lot of areas, so it should be a fun one. We'll start off with the A-Specs, and A-Specs are always really weird, because like, if they do outscale the previous one, it boots one out and then becomes the most played, and if it doesn't become the one, it's kind of useless. So we gave Magneton Blower this 3-star, potentially being a way for the controlling variants to have a better time into Lugia. Now, Lugia was just naturally becoming less popular, I think, of a play, so we didn't really need to set our sights on beating Lugia. Snorlax and Pidgeot control decks, they can sort of survive without having a care in the world for Lugia, and actually all the most successful builds have basically gone away from teching for Lugia at all. So this wasn't the approach that was required for control, which meant that the rating ends up flopping. We thought that there was potential for some builds of control to have this as an option, and it wasn't going to be the case. And I think going forward, I don't see a reason why Lugia is ever going to go back up to like 12% of the format. So I think Snorlax players can just try and dodge and weave rather than completely warping their deck around this and sort of like trying to recycle the Magneton Blower, which was kind of my idea here, that you could use this A-Spec over and over again with the likes of Regieleki as an attacker to overcome this matchup. But as we've seen with like Rotom, I suppose, as well in the past, these tech cards haven't really picked up in play too much. And it's actually going to be another A-Spec from this set that has come into the more recent control builds, which is a pretty interesting change. We'll go on to Brilliant Blender. I think 3-star maybe a little bit too high. Like, there was experimentation for Ceruledge, but I wouldn't really even call it... Well, I suppose it is like a low-tier deck, so I think 3-star is probably accurate. Pretty obvious as to like why it's here. We did have the sort of like new Kofu deck on here just to sort of demonstrate that, but also that's gonna be the nod to like the United Wings. Also to an extent like Ancient Box maybe looking towards this card rather than the other A-Specs that it has available to it. That didn't really kick off too much, so yes, it could go into Ceruledge in the future as well, but there's a debate around what the best A-Spec is for Ceruledge going into the next set. I think Budu's actually the best card coming to Ceruledge, so it's not guaranteed that it will have this A-Spec. So I think 3 is probably still like the high end for this card, but I do think Ceruledge becomes a better deck thanks to Budu, at least becomes like a relevant deck in the game, so that is something to bear in mind at the very least. We then have Scramble Switch. We rated this as the 3-star, thinking it was probably going to be the lesser popular A-Spec in Drago, but still possibly an A-Spec choice, and that just didn't happen. Drago is refined enough, and Prime Catcher is so important that everyone's just gone for Prime Catcher, saying, yeah, that's definitely the way. There was this small nod to, like, double Kyurem being such a big talking point with Drago that, like, maybe because Scramble Switch helps you double Kyurem in a lot of matchups, that this is worthwhile as an A-Spec, but it's not too much of a challenge anyway if you just play competently to not run out of resources and be able to double Kyurem. Even things like Noctowl can help you double Kyurem that little bit easier because you can like evolve up post V-Star and still get the important item cards out of the discard or out of the deck for you to like reload and that sort of stuff. So there are ways that we can do a double Trifrost if we have to. And yeah, Prime Catcher is too good right now, definitely in Drago, and I don't really foresee, I mean, there's not really many new decks coming from Prismatic Evolutions, so no real change there with Scramble Switch. Precious Trolley, really interesting one. We gave this a 2-star thinking that the current like decks that want to go wide didn't want to have this A-Spec in comparison to something like Unfair Stamp if we're looking at Gardevoir and Charizard, even the Pulse to an extent. And thinking that just Buddy Buddy Poffin with Arven was good enough, and we already had TMBvo and that sort of stuff, and that was just so good. And also we gave the note to above 70 hit point Pokemon finally having this chance to go wide. You can see that we noted the Reggies in there. I was also aware of Conkeldurr, so I kind of was aware of the Poison package, but didn't think it was a high tier deck. Obviously, I didn't have the foresight to come up with the Terrapagos Poison deck. I don't think many people had that foresight when they did give this card a very high rating. But there is still, as we've seen, branches of Charizard, although it's much less popular than other ace specs. We have seen like Corbell, Gardevoir have a really high placement leading into this trolley as well. So this card, just by the power of the Arven engine, especially with TM Evolution, has done well. It's also created the or much improved the Dragapult Ironthorns deck as well, which loves to just get 3 or 4 Dreepy down straight away, sometimes even lets you play Toedscruel tech cards and that sort of thing. So this card really shoots all the way up, I think, probably to a 5-star because it's in and is the focal point of Cloth Terapagos, which is a really powerful deck, but then also can sometimes show up in these other archetypes. We thought that it was going to be outshone by other ace specs in the decks that we did expect, and we didn't expect the new decks to come out to actually be good. We thought it was just going to be meme stuff like Pikachu Reggies. So, yeah, greatly underappreciated this card. I think it has a lot of staying power as well. Yes, the deck becomes fragile if you know the opponent's engine is a trolley-based engine and that they have to like get a supporter to get it on turn 1 or use Forest Seal Stone or something like that. You can get blocked by jamming towers, or you can be blocked by being forced to go first and then suddenly you don't get loads of basics out. We've even seen like Duraludon builds have Corbell Trolley as well. It's worth noting, because Archaludon's going to be a better deck going into the next set as well, just because we know it can handle Badoo quite nicely, even if it doesn't play it itself. So, yeah, the Trolley's a really interesting one. I think we do go all the way up to 5 stars. It's such a weird one, because we did have this debate for a long time. It looks like a bad rating, because we gave it 2, but like I said, the way ace specs go, you have to go hot on them or cold on them by thinking whether or not they just outclass another one. And it turns out this is just a crazy, crazy good card. It actually reminds me of VIP Pass when we underrated that card, just because how important it is to get a good turn 1, and Trolley gives you that. So we should have learned our lesson from back then, but we didn't. So yeah, Trolley was a big one. And then a couple other big misses, actually. We said some useful ace specs were bulk. Amulet of Hope, yeah, that did nothing. Miracle Headsets, we gave the 1-star, but I also thought that there could be a Pokestop build of Snorlax control that used the headset to give you instant access to supporters, but we still rated it very low. However, Enriching Energy did find its way into some of the controlling decks, I should say, where you cut the Rotom V, you go to boxed order, based on Sanders' approach of Snorlax, and then the Enriching Energy is the A-Spec now that can essentially allow you to draw cards from your penny. Adding a draw 4 onto your penny is absolutely ridiculous, and although you can't do that every single turn of the game, with Enriching Energy, there are a number of decks that have no hand disruption whatsoever, so whenever you are using penny, you can get your attachment in, draw your cards, then penny pick it back up and do it again next turn. So the fact that you turn penny into a draw supporter is just absolutely silly, and this card does enable that. Again, because my mindset was looking actually towards the card next to it, the Miracle Headset, being the like Pokestop can draw us cards, and then this item allows you to have discard fodder of supporters and lean heavier into Palpad. That was what I was looking towards rather than this Enriching Energy thing, which I think is a really, really cool solution actually to having a Rotomless control deck. So we'll probably bump that up to, I think, 3 stars, because it's not in every single Snorlax build. Maybe, yeah, I think 3 stars is accurate, because there'll still be a number of like Heroes Cape Snorlax builds, and Enriching Energy is like the new wave, but not necessarily a very popular way to play Snorlax. It's only recently started to have those tournament results, but definitely a far stronger card than I gave it credit for. And then Energy Search Pro, also one that we really undersold. I remember looking at the Japanese data, and there were some Golden Go that were playing eSearch Pro, but they all looked like really memey garbage to the most part, looking at those like early deck lists of eSearch Pro and how they were sort of formulated. But it does just turn out that the immediate fact that you can get like 350 damage guaranteed from like your turn 2 supporter, you can be more proactive now than you used to, where you would have to have lots of vessels, which is like a pretty high roll hand, or you'd have to wait for Letter of Encouragement. Your opponent takes a prize, then suddenly you can be popping off. Whereas the eSearch Pro means that you can be the aggressor when you need to, and you have that really easy reach, which is pretty powerful. Again, I didn't have the sort of hindsight of Togekiss, which is probably another card that we underrate, and possibly even to an extent as well, like Dusknoir going into Golden Go. We were aware that like prize cheating was probably important in Golden Go, but at the time, for me, that meant that we needed to keep to a really high water count and Palkia and cancelling Clone. And I think I may have even said that in the video. We may have just skipped past these A-specs because we rated them so low, but essentially the conversation that me and Jack had was that we think Palkia is so core to Golden Go that it has to keep that really high water energy count. And it turns out that Owen Kammerman was able to juggle a list that had the Palkia package, but just had 3 water, 3 metal, and then still had eSearch Pro and all the like different energy cards flowing out in the deck. So we're kind of along the right lines with the Golden Go, but I think the main misses was the Togekiss package allowing you to cheat prizes outside of using Palkia, and the fact that you can play E-Search Pro with like just low counts of metal, low counts of water, and then still have your spread of energy is the other kind of miss we had there. I played Golden Go a lot actually before Surging Sparks came out, so I was like fairly opinionated thinking I was right about this A-Spec, but got it completely wrong. We go on to the supporters. Surfer, probably just a 1-star. I don't think we use any of these Switch supporter as Surfer. Too many decks hold larger hand sizes that the Surfer only draws like 1 or 2. It's nowhere near as good as Birdkeeper, which is like that steady 3 that you can always get out of any hand. The Surfer just isn't that at all. So probably going to drop it down to the 1-star. Going on to the bulk supporters, these were all bulk supporters, not going to spend too much time on those. And also these supporters are also terrible. Let's go on to the trainer cards. Chill Teaser Toy, 1-star. Yeah, Tera Orb, we gave the 3 stars. I think that's pretty accurate. It did find its way into Dragapult Iron Thorns as a one-of. It found its way into this very niche, unpopular build of Charizard, which did have Noctowl in it. I know Stefan made a day 2 with a like Noctowl build of Charizard Pidgeot. And also this was like sometimes a one-of in Regidrago V-Star because it can allow you to cut down to 1 Dragapult. Then you have the upside of getting Teal Mask Ogopon and Alolan Exeggutor EX as well. So it's a nice card that sort of keeps you having a high count of like outs towards these cards whilst like trimming the fat of your list as well, I suppose, which I do think is pretty powerful. But it's not guaranteed in Drago. It's, you know, in a rare build of Charizard, it's like sometimes in the Terapagos build, even not that much, to be honest with you. So yeah, it allows you to do some like gymnastics with your deck list in terms of changing counts of stuff, but it's still not popular enough to be like a higher tier card. So I think 3 is pretty fair for it right now. Onto the bulk item cards. Elixir, yep, terrible. Dustball, terrible. Memo, terrible. Deduction Kit, terrible. But the one in the middle, the Call Bell, has actually had a lot of play. There's been success with a Call Bell Gardevoir, a Call Bell Dialga Archaludon as well. I'm probably missing some, but essentially people have tried I'll go second, let me Call Bell, let me Trolley, let me TM Evo, and just give myself maximum odds for that. Gardevoir being the deck that can obviously refine away the excess cards that are useless throughout the rest of the game. The Dialga has a slightly harder time of things, but just saying the fact that you can get your board developed that quickly is your entire win condition. I still feel it's gimmicky. I still feel like you always put 4 gear into your list before the Call Bell, even though gears aren't guaranteed, because gears are useful throughout the entire game. But the statement has been made that like we have such good search for Pokemon in the Trolley specifically that you can just choose to go second in this format just so that you can make that happen and give yourself essentially like 8 to 12 copies of Arven if you're counting like the gears, and it can go higher if you also play like Ultra Ball Fish as well if you really want to go down that direction. I think typically 4 gear plus Ultra Ball and Luminion should be plenty. So I actually think Call Bell is probably overplayed, but the results are there. So I probably have to give this a 3-star for being like probably not the best way to play Archaludon, probably not the best way to play Gardevoir, but has had the results behind it. So we got to give it its due there as well. Onto the tools then, we start off with a Counter Gain. We gave this a 4-star, and I was actually kind of doomsdaying Pidgeot Control, getting to this like critical mass of stuff that it can attack with, just with the combination of Counter Gain and Double Turbo Energy. And I also noted that there's like such good search for tools right now, with Arven already being an incredible support card, and Town Store also being like a reasonable stadium, that I was thinking that maybe there was this outside chance for like Slaking and a few other archetypes to sort of look at this as a good way to cheat your acceleration. And Pidgeot has been successful with 1 Counter Gain in the list, and it has enabled a few extra Pokemon to come into the deck. Things like the Ace Nullifier Genesect is like a much more prominent card now that you have Counter Gain as like an extra tool just to have a critical mass. And there is that Black Kyurem EX that you can see on the screen there as well, that can try and like paralysis trap these dragon Pokemon, of which there are many of them in the format, obviously Drago, but also like Raging Bolt in there as well, and Dragapult physically in the format. So there are reasons to have this paralysis option in the deck list. We didn't really see like a full Bouffalont style approach. There was some murmurings of like Lost Headbutt going alongside the reduction of damage Bouffalont as well. That didn't really come to fruition too much. But yeah, I was kind of a little bit hot on this one, and I thought it would be more widespread of a card. At the moment, I think we probably have to drop it down to 3-star because Pidgeot is like a performing deck, but still like really, really low play rates. And even though it's like a good card in the deck list, it's not really defining Pidgeot in any way. So probably down to like 3-star, but this is always going to be that like lying in wait card that we have to remember whenever new cards are coming out, so that this is still a great reduction that we can gain in the format, especially with like Dusknoir, especially with Magneton and other stuff like that we can cheat a lot of energy effectively, and this is just another way to do that. Onto TM Fluorite. Yeah, this one's terrible. The berries are also terrible. Onto stadiums. Gravity Mountain, we did give that 3-star. We were a little bit higher on like attacking Pikachu builds. I remember we were trying a Koraidon style approach that did have a Pikachu that, you know, we had the right energy to attack with it. And obviously we tried like the Blissey approach with the trolley, ironically, and that's possibly why we thought trolley was so bad, was that it was so bad in Blissey that we were then thinking that trolley was bad. But the problem was the Pokemon we were getting out into play, after all, which is kind of interesting to think about in terms of our testing process. But yeah, we were maybe a little bit higher on Pikachu itself, which meant that we needed the exact minus 30 damage. So I think I have to bump this down to like 2 or 1-star. I haven't really seen it showing up in any of the real meta contenders right now. And I think that's down to us really searching for a good new attacking Pokemon, and Pikachu was like, I guess, the best thing possible from this set. But the Pikachu deck itself was just too much work, and it was better as a bit part player. And then rightly so, Lively Stadium, even though it is an additional hit point buff, it's always going to be worse than just having tools in the metagame, and they're always going to trump having Lively Stadium, especially because all of our aggressive archetypes need to have other stadiums. Pokestop give consistency, Area Zero is really big for Miraidon, Terapagos, and even like some of the fire stuff would prefer to have Magma Basin, as we saw with Gouging Fire, so all of those decks have to have a stadium that's far more critical than just having some passive hit point buff. At the start of the video, I said we were like wildly wrong on so many. So yeah, we had this on a couple slides. We rated Countergate as our best card, actually, in terms of the items. So I definitely think the trolley is the standout card here. Tera Orb, definitely a strong one. Countergate still is a strong card, of course. And we probably got some of the A-specs actually like muddled in how they were going to be useful, with the Enriching Energy and the Energy Search Pro, you know, being relevant cards in the metagame, being like between that, like, I suppose E-Search Pro, probably that 4-star category, with Golden Go being like the 3rd most popular deck in the last tournament and having some top 8 placements, and then Enriching Energy being like just starting to shift the mentality around Snorlax, might be becoming more popular going into the future. Then Corbell is also another standout from this slide, but give us some credit, there was a lot of junk in this set that we had to wade through. Jumping into the EXs then, Durant EX have to drop to a 1-star actually. We gave it that 2-star saying that Chi-Yu might still just be like the better option, but this allows you to attack with other stuff, of course, or just end your turn on Rotom Draw instead of using that Jealousy Singe. So there were reasons to like this card, but the Snorlax players aren't using Chi-Yu for like mirror matches, and the Pidgeot players are going down other directions as well, so no real home for Durant right now. Ceruledge, I think 3 stars probably on the right side of things. We were a lot more cautious than the community, who had higher hopes for this card. I think it will start to see a bit more success with Budew coming out, simply because this deck has no good attack on turn 1. Now you have a single retreat cost Charcadet, and you have a nice defensive play that you can make. And of course, you're a low maintenance archetype on your own end, so if someone's Budewing into you, you can KO them with a Charcadet, or you can just evolve into Ceruledge and do your own thing. So just the fact that this deck plays into Budew well is like good news for it. But in this format, it was like kind of played, kind of experimented with, but really didn't do much in the competitive format. Milotic we gave 1-star, maybe best as 2-star with like some experimentation. I know there was some Ogerpon Mimikyu wall style stuff going around, and these have been archetypes in the past, kind of like Boogeyman decks that you never really want to come up against, but they have no engine, they draw really poorly, and they're just kind of incoherent. And I do think the majority of the best performing Pidgeot controls, for example, wouldn't have this card. Oftentimes look to Farigiraf as a better like stage 1 walling ability right now. Black Kyurem, we were so close. We noted that there were a number of dragons in the format, and we even had the DTE Countergain Iono combination together. We were just skeptical whether or not that made it into Pidgeot control, and actually it did in a number of the builds. So we were right on the money with the application of this card. We just didn't think it was going to be that relevant or too niche, or there wasn't enough space in Pidgeot, or that there was other ways that Pidgeot could already beat some of these matchups that it didn't necessarily need to have the Black Kyurem, but it was in enough of the sort of best performing Pidgeot builds that we probably do have to give it that nod of like the 2-3 star style category, where it often made it into the best Pidgeot control builds. Pikachu EX, I think that sort of 4 to 5 star rating is still pretty accurate. I know Koraidon had that big tournament win, but also there was the idea around it just going into Lost Zone box as a great gate target. I think the thing that flopped with Pikachu is it trying to be its own deck, having Joltik acceleration, using just a bunch of Magneton to spam Topaz Bolt, using Blissey. All of these things kind of flopped. Even trying like an Area Zero Pikachu Noctowl deck that had like Crispin and Trumpet and all this other stuff, all of that stuff kind of flopped. Oh, and you can see we were talking about it on these slides as well. We gave Pikachu a lot of time because we didn't rate many cards highly in the format. We mentioned that this card wasn't perfect and that it required lots of energy and also required a bunch of tool buffs to actually be good enough into the stage 2s. And we also mentioned that cancelling clones in a number of decks in the format already, and Hawlucha was another way that you could get around this ability, and even just like damage counter placement, Monkey Dory. There's a ton of decks that naturally get around Resolute Heart, so it's a really clever card in that like you can't print this in a number of formats, but in the exact format that we were in, this card is scary, but a lot of decks inherently had answers to it, which I think is like really, really good card design to find a niche for an ability like this, which is so scary to write, but is actually just like pretty fair and balanced. Overall though, Pikachu flopped as its own main attacker and was just chilling out on the bench nicely for Koraidon, and then it was a really good beat stick option in the Lost Zone box decks when you already have things like Greninja that can help out against the evolving archetypes, and Sableye as well to an extent. You can leverage that card to set cards up for KOs with Topaz Bolt as well. And I actually think Pikachu to some extent was part of the reason why the Terapagos Clorf deck came together in the first place, is that the Terapagos Dusknoir builds really struggled against the Pikachu. It didn't want to fit its own cancelling clone in the deck list to have a tech card just for this one deck. And the fact that status conditions also was a great way to get around Pikachu, I think low-key that might have been a big reason why the poison build of Terapagos actually came to be in the first place. So thanks to Pikachu for creating, inadvertently, a really awesome deck. We gave Latias that 4-star. I also think that's pretty accurate. It definitely made it into the majority of Miraidons. Didn't make it into the majority of other things, but you still see it here and there coming into some of the Roaring Moon builds. For the most part, though, the Raging Bolts didn't take this on. It didn't create, like, Entei Ogerpon being a big archetype, anything like that, or even though we saw some of that out in Japan. So I'm glad we only rated this a 4-star, even though it is potentially such a versatile ability. The fact that bench space is tight and everything that isn't Area Zero means it's like a real cost, because a lot of the aggressive decks, they need to have Mew, Squawk, Fez already on their bench, that they didn't actually have that much space for the Lati, and also by having Lati in your list, you immediately lose to Snorlax because you're cutting switch cards to play the Lati in the most part. So I'm glad that we identified it was good in only a couple of these decks, and that's why we leaned towards the 4 rather than the 5, and we got that one pretty right. Sylveon EX, a sigh of relief, because this was a stressful card when we were talking about it. We knew that Sylveon GX back in the day had such a devastating effect and profound effect on the format, but this isn't that card at all. Obviously, Sylveon GX back in the day had a really good first attack and was within a really good archetype, whereas this deck didn't have that sort of foundation to build off of. Even though that Angelite is a terrifying effect, no one can really fit that many cards into one deck to sort of make it happen. Of course, the next set is all about those evolutions, but we really haven't seen anything out of Japan to make me think that those cards are going to be that strong. They don't leap off the page too much outside of like maybe type coverage as a big boast, so I'm not expecting much from Sylveon in the future. Archaludon we rated 3-star, and it's a really weird one because obviously it won the Champions League, but that's not technically our format, and actually in the format so far it's only the 20th best performing deck, so I do think 3-star is probably accurate. That being said, coming into this weekend, I think Archaludon's going to be like relatively popular, might even make day one of the graphic over in Birmingham, so watch this space. Archaludon could start to have its time, but it is definitely like this meta-dependent style archetype. Has very obvious strengths in that 300 stat is really helpful, 220 is a great number to be hitting, and the energy acceleration can help out with your Dialga. And then there's also the Raging Hammer, which is very solid with Relicanth. But if certain other archetypes are on top, like Raging Bot, for example, this deck's going to get absolutely trashed. So Archaludon's going to remain an archetype that sort of ebbs and flows with the formats. As we've seen, again, it can handle Badoo quite nicely just because Hammerin's a good attack. So I think this is probably going to be going up in popularity rather than down going into the future, but I do think we're going to have to sort of play it by ear, tournament to tournament with this archetype, because it's not inherently like the most powerful thing you can be doing. It's just pretty consistent, and then if the stats of Archaludon happen to be good in terms of the context of the format, whether you're staying out of range of certain attackers or being able to KO certain things, that's when this card really starts to shine. Another tragic rating from us. We didn't believe in the Alolan Exeggutor EX. We didn't think Swinging Sphene was good enough. We said there were too many situations where the Sphene was a risk and was therefore bad, but we were completely forgetting the fact that if Sphene's not good, you have like 3 or 4 other great attacks that you can pick from in those situations when you are the apex of all dragons, the Regidrago V-Star, And the perk of this card is that there were a bunch of basic EXs out there that were trying to use hit point buffs to keep Regidrago out of range, even from doing sneaky Dragapult shenanigans, or 2-turn Kyurem wipes. So the solution was that, hey, why don't we just start one-hit KOing them with the Sphene, whether it's a heads flip or a tails flip, I'm always taking 2 prizes, because there were enough aggressive basic attacking decks in the format that were ironically trying to challenge Drago, that you could get away with having this flip and it basically being a no cost to you. Whilst at the same time having some application into the controlling matchups as well, where you can ignore the annoying walling Pokemon in front of you and deal with their bench stuff. Or even combined with like Temple of Sinnoh, you could get around Miss Energy and still Sphene through even things like Mimikyu. So obviously we didn't think about that application, but I think it's mostly that first part, which is like, we were saying don't use Swinging Sphene every turn, but obviously Drago doesn't have to Sphene every turn. They can choose to use it only when it's like no cost to them. So kind of a mistake there. We thought this was going to be a space that Regidrago couldn't afford, but this card was good enough to usurp one of the 2 copies of Dragapult in the majority of Drago builds. My boy Slaking, we rated it a 3-star. Yeah, hate to see it. I really enjoyed testing Slaking when the set was first coming out. I felt like it was a really good bully of the basic EX decks and really good into a lot of the V-stars as well. But the main issue of Slaking is that's not everything, and the format was really, really wide, actually. All of the stage 2s, like Gardevoir, Charizard, Dragapult, they were making a mockery out of you. And then the Clorf Terapagos deck came out of nowhere, so you're not even tanky anymore. So pretty rough scenes for Slaking, unfortunately. I still think there are elements of Slaking that I look at and just like, but the format was just far too vast for a card like this. It's actually pretty fun as we start looking at some of the synergies and stuff. I was on the Kool-Aid with Fan Rotom, making this like a consistent archetype. I was trying it with Pidgeot, and obviously that's a good engine. Yeah, there's like a lot of good synergy here, and it's funny actually. I was getting so tilted with Hydreigon chat because people weren't talking about my boy Slaking. That's the actual secret. This is the stage 2 that I was low-key rooting for. You can see we gave it like a decent rating. But all the attention was always on that stupid Hydreigon, which always tilted me. Speaking of which, stupid Hydreigon, we gave it a 1-star. It was the 25th best performing deck in this format in IRL tournaments. So we have to give it 2-star for its experimentation. I think this is completely contrived, manipulated by people wanting YouTube clicks, to be honest with you. I think this card is still horrendous. I still can't believe that literally the best player of all time chose to take this to a tournament, unironically. I'm certain he was doing it just to piss me off. But there you go, Todd wasted a trip. Tatsugiri, 1-star, yep. Cyclizar, 1-star, we know that. And then Palossand and Flygon, also pretty terrible. Oh, there are more. Scoville and Kilowattrel Flamigo, also terrible. So we actually did a lot better on the EX front. I think we're pretty much spot on with Latias and Pika. Pretty much spot on with Archaludon and Ceruledge, saying they'd be contenders. But on the lower end of things, Slaking we were a little bit excited about. And then really from this slide, we really undersold Alolan Egg. That's like a 4 or 5-star card because it made it into the best deck in the game and substantially helped a couple of key matchups. And the Black Kyurem as well is also worth noting as a card that did make it into Pidgeot. Onto the single prize stuff, Paldian, Tauros. We gave that 3-star rating just because we were on that sort of thought process, that journey of will Pidgeot go towards Bouffalance? If that's the case, Tauros is a great partner here. You can start lost zoning energy, you can start removing energy from stage 2 specifically as a tech inclusion, but that build of Pidgeot never really came to fruition. Again, the format was too vast to commit too many spaces to such a narrow card. Chien-Pao we gave 2-star. I don't think this has seen any play just yet, but it's a great binder card to have. We're not really in a format where we need this card. We have enough searchability from, say, a Lost Vacuum, and there's not the same sort of urgency to remove a stadium from the opponent as like in the Pump Kaboot era where you had to get rid of Path. So definitely a decent card, but not something that we are yearning for right now. Magneton, yeah, pretty good. I think 4 stars about the right place to put it. Miraidon, has spiked to tournament and is just outside the top 10 of decks right now in terms of performance. Magneton does have a profound impact on the deck as well. I think it's far less casino than it was previously. You can have much more reliability in the deck. Oftentimes now you can create game plans of saying, I'm going to use Amp very much twice and then still finish with a Raichu of like 4 or 5 energy, and that can be my win condition. And that actually comes off. You have enough energy with manual attachments, generators, and the Magnet Guaranteed 3 that you can sculpt those game plans and reliably pull them off with Miraidon. Small note though, it was best just recovering lightning energy and not doing much with the Pikachu EX as an attacking threat. Ah, Rotom, the Doomsdayers. You remember this one? Remember people losing their minds about this card? We tentatively gave it 2-star that people would experiment with it, and that's because people were going insane over this card. But it really seemed to be a storm in a teacup, huh? Even with Lightning Energy, where Miraidon's a deck in the format, Bolt's a deck in the format, and there's potential for like Luminous Energy Ditto packages going around. I was possibly even debating a Ditto controlling deck with counter gain, Luminous, double turbo energy, that sort of thing. None of that came to fruition. Instead, just good old-fashioned taking prizes was the best thing to do with an attack. It's funny actually looking at this Rotom to see that it did literally nothing, and then the very next set they printed Badoo. They were clearly trying to think of solutions to, in some cases, slow down the format or at least warp deck building. And maybe this Rotom just like didn't have the desired effect, and then they had to go for like a universal card that also had free retreat. And that's how Badoo was born. Interesting to think about that actually, that Rotom was not getting the desired outcome that they were going for, possibly the card designers. But yeah, let's put this down to 1 star and welcome our new best friend Badoo. Azumarill we gave 2 stars, but probably best as a 1 star. Gastrodon, also a card that had like a lot of debate. We gave it the 1 star, it's done basically nothing, so happy with that rating. Koraidon we gave 3 star. I think we might have to put this up a little... it's a weird one, because Roaring Moon isn't like that high tier, and it's still only a 1-of. I think Roaring Moon could still be an archetype without the need for this card. Yeah, I think 3 is probably about right, where Ancient Box isn't like so much better because of this card, and Turbo Roaring Moon isn't so much better because of this card either. Yes, there's times in games where Koraidon is a great attack to choose. Yes, that fighting type coverage is relevant with Terapagos running around still. And obviously in the best case scenario, you can take out Fez with this as well. Yeah, I mean, definitely a solid card. It helps the ancient decks, but it doesn't really change the fortunes of the archetype too much. And that means we actually need to give a public apology to Togekiss, which was a metagame card, and we didn't even put that in the review. I never thought that a gimmicky stage 2 like this would actually see the light of day, but that is a nod to how good Pokestop Night Stretcher is as a combination. Golden Go doesn't have to play this, and I'm going to be interested to see if people go down this direction still, or go for the Palkia variant that we've seen from Owen Kammerman. But at the end of the day, that coin flip can be a win condition. It keeps you on a 3-attack game plan, no matter what you're coming up against. And it's obviously a terrifying card to come up against because you can't really do anything about it. You can't afford to take a single prize KO in the majority of situations. So yeah, you kind of just have to accept the fact that that's happening now and it's nonsense in your face. Probably have to give the Togekiss like a 3-star rating because of that. Other than that, I think our general pessimism was the right approach in this case. I think probably going lower on all of the 2 stars that we gave out, and also going lower on the Tauros. And possibly we got a little bit lucky that Magneton was just good enough as a 1-1 package in Koraidon, and the whole Pikachu thing that we were trying to explore didn't really work out too much. That's it though, that was the review of the set review for Surging Sparks. Looking back, it's so sad that we were on the right train of thought on a number of cards, but the rating didn't quite reflect that. Also interesting to think about our testing process and how sometimes our views could be warped based on like the archetypes that we were playing certain cards in and their effectiveness, but also going to give me some pause for thought when we start rating some of these other cards in the future. We were already chatting a little bit about Badoo. That's clearly the most important card and the most memorable card of Prismatic Evolutions, but myself and Jack are going to get into that in a lot more detail tomorrow, so stick around for that video. For now though, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow for another one. Cheers.